there. Okay, we can move forward.
Okay, we'll call the meeting to order for the City of Saratoga Springs, Tuesday, October 20th, 2020 at 6 p.m. Present tonight, we have Councilman McComber via electronic means, Councilman Porter, Councilman Karn, Councilman Wilden, and Councilman Podeska are all present here also. I've asked Councilman Porter to lead us in our invocation and Councilman Podeska to lead us in our pledge, and we'll go from there.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we're grateful to gather together this evening in order to meet together and to discuss the topics before us and to plan for the future of our city, to make decisions on the priorities that we will have going forward. We ask Thee to guide us with Thy Spirit to make decisions that are in the best interest of the residents of Saratoga Springs now and in the future. We ask Thee to please bless those first responders and healthcare workers on the front lines of battling this pandemic that we're currently going through. And we ask Thee to also watch over the men and women of the armed forces as they protect us overseas. And we say these things in the name of Thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
All right, we'll go into the room, please rise. Repeat the pledge with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Okay, public input. Time has been set aside for the public to express ideas, concerns, and comments for subject matter not listed on this agenda. Do we have anything sent in, David?
I haven't received anything.
Okay. With no public input at this time, I will close it. It's all yours. We'll let you have it. Okay. Reports. Anything from the council?
Yeah. I think my mic's on. Tell me if it's not. Today we had our first official meeting, I guess, of the Northwest County Transportation Study that we're participating with MAG and Eagle Mountain. We've identified and hired a contractor. It was LSC. I can't remember what acronym it was, but I believe it was LSC. They recently did a similar project, I believe, in Weaver County, and so we're looking at moving forward. And I believe that we should have a final. They're telling us we'll have a final product by January. So hopefully we can get in front of UTA when they do their next change day after that, and perhaps make some progress. We're looking at getting improved service out here from UTA. Basically, we haven't really had useful service since they canceled the express bus to downtown. So we're looking at options both for regional transportation as well as looking at some possibilities of some local transportation or some micro transit options. Some of that last mile stuff, getting people around town and to the train stations and stuff, as well as trying to reduce the commute. So there will be a survey that they asked us to kind of promote and get our residents to give their feedback. That should be coming out here probably in a couple weeks, and I'll let you guys know so that we can all blast it out on our social media and networks.
On that discussion that Councilmember Porter was saying, we did a survey a few months ago, and between us and Eagle Mountain, we had consolidated and asked the same questions. And so this would be any gap question survey for that. But again, the goal is to hopefully get some UTA service out here for that. So really that was the only point that I wanted to add to that. From a staff's perspective, things are going well. We've got a lot of projects. We've got a lot of things moving forward. You can expect that in an upcoming council meeting, we'll be having some impact fee discussions on impact fee studies and things. In fact, much of the presentation for tonight will be coming from those reports, but we're charging ahead, staying busy with lots of planning and moving a lot of items forward.
Anything else from administration?
Not at this time.
Okay. Department reports are in the packet. Feel free to reach out to the department heads if there's any questions. We have the minutes from October 6th, 2020. I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve minutes?
Second.
I have a first from Councilman Carn, a second from Councilman Porter. Any further discussion?
Did the change get put in? I didn't check.
Yeah, it did.
It did,
Okay. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay. That is probably the shortest unproductive policy meeting we've ever had. Okay, work session. We have the capital facilities project and sewer review.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Jeremy, I believe Jeremy's online and he'll be helping lead this conversation. David, if you could broadcast our PowerPoint presentation, that would be fantastic. All right. So in essence, at the council retreat last January, the council asked us to work on our prioritization. We had originally planned on doing this at the start of the summer at our mid-year retreat. Due to COVID and a variety of other things, it's just been on the back burner. We did want to follow back up with you and bring to you the items that we've identified. As I mentioned earlier, we've updated, or we're in the process right now of updating. You're going to get an updated transportation master plan. That's going to the Planning Commission at their next meeting, so you'll see that in mid-November. Hopefully in November or the 1st of December, you'll see our drinking water impact fee report. You'll see our updated secondary water impact fee report. You'll see a updated sewer impact fee report. So again, all of those projects have been moving forward. We've been updating those. And as you know, we typically end up updating those reports about once every other, a year and a half to 2 years, which is incredibly fast. And the reason that we're updating these things so often is because of the rapid nature of development in our community. Certain projects will come online and we'll need to do updates. We've done several smaller updates where we've added projects and we've done some small amendments. Now's the time where we feel it's important that we redo those studies. Now, most of those studies will come through and will then basically establish the proportionate share that each residential unit should pay, or each residential unit equivalent should pay as they come online. So in the end, everyone has to pay their proportionate share. The thing that's tricky about those, and we'll discuss this more in a few weeks when you have the studies in front of you, is it really depends on how fast we continue to grow. But proportionately, everybody's supposed to be paying the same amount, whether it's to buy into the projects that we've built into our existing system. So a portion of those impact fees is to reimburse us for projects that we've previously built. Sometimes we've done that with bonds. Other times we've done that with, money that we've collected. But basically, the capacity gets spread out amongst all those users. So tonight, a lot of the discussion that we'll be having is going to be predominantly driven by the projects that we have prioritized now that we've had a chance to take a step back and relook at the system, remodel all of the system, and we're coming back to you with a prioritization of those projects. Again, a lot of those projects that we're proposing may be city funded would be funded with those impact fees. And so that's really the direction that this discussion will be having. What we need from you as a council tonight is what your appetite is for moving these projects forward and how we move these projects forward For the most part, it's a much smaller bonding list than what we talked about at the retreat. And we're trying to really queue these projects up, again, for us to discuss them tonight, for us to get into a little more depth in the impact fee studies in the next couple of meetings, and then really by the end of our January retreat, have those priorities nailed down, and then we can start moving forward with funding strategies based on those priorities. So that's kind of the direction that we're going to be going. First slide, David. David, first slide. Thank you. What this slide shows.
Is this a given back and forth?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're open mic, jump in, okay.
And typically, you give and we receive, so we're looking forward to it. So what we're starting with is an analysis, and this is the analysis. We kind of wanted to do this last council meeting, but we hadn't gotten this analysis from our sewer consultant. What this does is this slide, and this is in your packet, is this slide really kind of identifies where the bottlenecks are across the city. And you know, from a sewer standpoint, these bottlenecks are things that could be 5 years off. It could be, you know, closer to the 10-year window. We've pretty much only focused on those projects that we feel are in that 10-year window. And the real question becomes is, depending on where permits get pulled and where construction happens, is really where those capacities could potentially shrink. And I say potentially shrink because we do our best to shake our magic 8-ball and get an idea of which development's going to come first. But until a plat records, we don't reserve capacity. And so what these numbers show is these are the equivalent residential units that are available as of today. And then the next plat that comes along and records in any of these areas could reduce those numbers. But we don't record or we don't reserve capacity until a plat records. And at plat recordation, just as a reminder, that's when the developer is required to pay for their water, for water rights. That's when they're required to have their water rights developed, dedicated to us if they're dedicating water rights. And that's where we ultimately preserve the sewer capacity. So theoretically, all of these numbers are there. When they record the plat, that's when we take it off the list, and that capacity is not available for anyone else. So we've not built anything beyond that capacity, and we've not recorded plats beyond that capacity, but we have vested density, and we have vested property rights for developers to develop their properties, even though they haven't necessarily recorded those plats yet. So that plat recordation becomes that pivotal point where things get locked in. Now, if you recall, we give final approvals on things and people have up to 2 years to record those plats. After those plats, if they don't record them, then they fall off the books. They have to come back in and get another final approval and then record that plat. So that's kind of that constant balancing act that we're working with developers. Developers typically like to build all the infrastructure and then record their plat. So that way they're building the infrastructure and then posting a warranty bond on it, as opposed to bonding for the whole cost of the project, then building the infrastructure, basically paying for it twice through bonding means, and then ultimately, you know, it just costs them more when they do that. So they like to build their infrastructure and then record their plats. So at this point, these are the projects that would be triggered. So for example, we tried to demonstrate the lift station, the Posey lift station, which is just off of Pioneer Crossing, just north of Pioneer Crossing. It has 3,200 units of capacity. It's going to take many, many years for us to run out of that capacity. However, we also have a lot of potential units that are out there with Wildflower, with Mount Saratoga, with Beacon Point, or not Beacon Point, but with Jordan Promenade, with our commercial areas. We have a lot of units that are kind of queued up that are in that. We think that it's many years away. However, the potential number of units exceeds that 3,200 units in the northern half of the city. That's why we're kind of keeping it on the radar as a concern of area. In the south end of the city, we're limited by basically the lift station. I think it's lift 5, that's just below the pro shop.
Hey, Mark, in that 3,200 ERUs, could that be eaten up fairly quickly with commercial coming in?
It could. Commercial generally is not a massive consumer of ERUs. So let's hypothetically say a Tyson chicken plant, processing plant came in like out in Eagle Mountain. That's one of those water users that could consume a ton of credits or a ton of those ERUs because they're a high water user. Generally speaking, you know, schools, businesses, depending on what they are, aren't huge water consumers. I want to say closer to
Based on the,
4 or 5-ish, but I could be wrong.
it's based on the number.
Spigots or, yeah.
It's fixtures
Yeah.
and then, you know, estimated use. You can get a lot of toilet flushes in compared to doing all the laundry for a family or running the dishwasher for a big
Like,
family.
do we have to Strata? Do we know like Costco without like 10 ERUs?
Yeah, but that has a large restaurant component to it, and
Yeah.
so that's a higher water
Okay.
user. So
So
again,
that's good.
we're in the process right now of trying to get our arms around a lot of the more long-term ERU consumptive conversations. But again, in concept, we just wanted to show you where the bottlenecks are that we've identified at this point, both north and south. The north has far less bottlenecks in the long run because they have so much capacity remaining on that lift station in the north. And if you remember, part of the reason why we did the sewer projects that we have over the last few years is because the south sewer station was out of capacity. And that was out of the Inlet Park sewer station, which is just across the street from the police station. So the gravity outfall lines are in. We've got a lot of capacity in the south, except for some of these more localized areas further south. So next slide, please. So if you take a look at the very end south of the city, there's a potential of 770 ERUs. That's great. It doesn't really matter though, because up further north, the capacity is about 500 units at the lift station. And so again, the 770 is great, but until the capacity of the lift station is relieved, then it ultimately wouldn't resolve or wouldn't result in more units being recorded beyond the lift station capacity. These are the capacity shortfalls that we see in the north, and you'll notice that that red line is really looking up towards the sewer line that's going to go from Tractor Supply out to basically Mountain View Corridor. There's 3 or 4 developers that are queued up to develop some properties out there, and ultimately we feel that development, whether it's DAI or whether it's any of those other projects, any one of those projects would trigger the need to get that sewer line built, and we think that that will be largely built by developers. The next line, and I apologize, when we tilted that, I lost my view of that. Can you just turn your screen, Caleb? Just turn your screen. Yep. That's mine. Yep. No, you're good. I got this now. So the next one, N2, is that big dot, and that basically goes through Boyer's next phase 3 of the crossing. And so they've agreed to build that as part of that project. And so we think that that's great. We would basically have them build it. We'd enter a development reimbursement agreement, and we'd reimburse them as that project comes along. NE1 and N1E and N1F are both small projects. Ultimately, once the gravity line is built, and that's the N1C or the Oakwood line, segment of the line, when that's built, we would want to spend the money using city collected impact fees at that point to do a crossover manhole, and that's the $50,000 project. Or we'd want to do, we'd want to do that $235,000 project, which again would basically shorten the line the Posey lift station now currently pushes, and we'd connect that into the gravity outfall that is being built at the N1C, the yellow project there. And ultimately that project would then gravity flow out. So again, by shortening the distance that we're pumping the sewer out of this Posey lift station, it basically means that we'd never have to do another expansion to the Posey lift station. It would be at build out capacity, and basically we would just realign those. So again, right now we think that developers, and it's not just any one of those developers, it could be Edge, it could be additional PRI properties or something like that would develop. It's basically developers. We think these are the most likely to build those projects. We'd then pay anything above the project cost. Because again, in Utah law, they're only required to build the minimum for themselves. We typically save us a lot of money by having them upsize those projects and building those projects as part of the master system so that we don't have to come in, rip out the roads and redo the sewer, things of that nature. So there's some economies of scale to that. Of these projects, these are all projects that are important, but nothing that would, we think, be required in the first 5 years. We think probably from year 5 to year 10 is when any of these might get built. Again, DAI or any of the other developers on the red project area, they may want it to go sooner, at which point they would build, and then we'd enter into a reimbursement agreement for anything that's above their capacity needs.
And Mark, with the N1F and N1E, is that because it's already in a developed area, so there's not developers that would help fund that, or?
So N1E is interesting because it captures all of the sewer that's coming out of a lot of those built neighborhoods and things like that. It would allow for future capacity expansion, no doubt. But basically, by turning the sewer at those locations, it basically means that the N1F project, for example, it would basically, we have the new gravity outfall that's underneath the existing sewer line. So if we build a manhole so that it can just drop down into that, it saves it going north to the Posey lift station and then us pumping it into the same line. So that's just a new manhole basically that gets built that redirects it away from the lift station and then out the gravity system. So that one just makes a lot of sense.
So that's just for better efficiency from the city standpoint, but not a minimum requirement for the developer to put that in?
But it also, it does add capacity to the system in the future as well.
Okay.
It completes the conversion. Sorry, this is Jeremy. Once N1C is built, the yellow, those two small projects, E and F, complete the connections of converting everything in the north to the gravity line.
Yeah.
And at that point, we would no longer need to track the ELUs in the lift station. So that 3,200 is only needing to track until those projects are built. And once the EF and C projects are built, then at that point we're done. And the Posey lift station in the north area is basically, ready for build out, with the exception of, with the exception of connecting lines to bring in projects. But so really those two small projects just make the connection to fully convert everything over to the gravity line.
And it's not tied to the developer because it's just more efficiency for the city's standpoint?
It could be tied to a developer. We just felt like those were small enough projects, bite-sized projects that when that when that connection is built, the gravity outfall is built, they just make so much sense for us to do that.
It is possible that if Oakwood or somebody builds N1C, we could likely work with them to also complete N1E as part of it, so.
Yeah. How far ahead of schedule is N1C?
N1C, so for example, right now, we don't have to build that until we run out of capacity at the Posey lift station. So 3,200 units. It's several years.
But they're going to put that in as they develop. How far ahead are they?
So right now, they're getting ready to bring in phase 2 and 3 of their project, which is a couple of years ahead of schedule.
Okay.
So again, they're reaching out to us right now, wanting to have some planning meetings, and they are seeking some clarification from the council where they're going to want to meet with you because they want to start building the park network along the Jordan River, and they'd like to get some of your vision of what that would look like. So they're getting ready to kind of do that. So we'll be meeting with them soon, but they're probably at least 2 years ahead of schedule right now, is my understanding. That was supposed to be a 5-year build.
This is phase 4 that we're talking about, right?
This would be phase 2 and 3 actually. Phase 2 was.
So this would be part of what they're looking to pull down now.
Their next pull down.
So potentially in the next 5 years, not 10 years, to get N1C in, which would put the entire northern, when they go there and we do E and F, everything's gravity up north.
Yep.
The ELUs doesn't come into play.
Everything west of Redwood.
North and west of Redwood, right?
So.
What, and just to clarify, I think when we say it's not tied to developer, I think that's a little bit of a misnomer because we can use impact fees as tied to developers, just not a very specific one. So we're not going to fund it with existing residential fees, even though it benefits them from an efficiency standpoint.
Correct. So F, basically, F could be anybody that's building south of that point down to Pony Express and west of Redwood Road. So any developer in that area theoretically would be utilizing that capacity and helping with that capacity. Potentially, yeah. So again, as Jeremy said, it completes that system.
Yeah.
So this is actually a little bit easier and a little bit more straightforward. So then if we go to the south end of the city, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Next slide, please. David?
He needs to wake up first.
There's a delayed response with it, so just a moment. I'm not sure why.
Does that mean David Slow?
So down south,
David Slow?
down south, a similar conversation. What we're trying to do is we're trying to identify, projects that make sense. And this one is a little bit trickier because the lift station 10, which is right near that big blue dot, that is kind of the control gate, if you would. The south end of the city is limited to the capacity that's remaining in that lift station. And if you remember a few years ago, we were originally planning on upsizing all of the sewer lines through all of SSD from this point north so that we could have enough capacity. And because we were having the gravity outfall conversation, we realized that if we upsize the gravity outfall, added this lift station 10, and redirected the sewer that's south of this lift station into that new gravity outfall, we would save ourselves the hassle and the impact, frankly, of basically rebuilding a couple of miles worth of sewer lines through existing neighborhoods. That would have been incredibly impactful. Not to mention, some of those sewer lines go between houses. It was built by a developer before we had standards that said, no, keep all the sewer in the roads. It kind of cuts right, it's the straightest line between homes, and that always is a very impactful type of development. So we realized that if we did the lift station here, and you see that red area is really going to go from Grandview Boulevard down to the top of Ring Road, and that's building a gravity line there. That gravity line, in conjunction with S43, if we connect S43, it takes 300 existing homes and it redirects it to the north, which frees up 300 units of capacity on that lift station 10. And so again, our thought was those two pieces of the project, S42B and S43, it buys us time before we have to build the lift station. And we've identified this as being city impact fee or developer. From a development standpoint, we've not recorded more lots than we have available in the lines currently. Those 500 units could get recorded pretty quickly because basically everything from Jacobs Ranch all the way to the southernmost development in the city, it's competing for the same roughly 500 units of capacity in the lift station. Now, beyond the lift station to the south, there's a couple of pipes that have less capacity. One of them is capped at like 370 units. One of them has 570 units. Again, that becomes a bit of a misnomer because the capacity of the lift station is the governing control or weakness, if you would, in our system. And again, we've kind of been planning for this for about maybe the last 5 years when we realized that rather than spend more money to upsize all of the lines and then still have to rebuild the lift station on the northern end of SSD development, we figured if we're going to have to rebuild a lift station, let that one be its build-out capacity, which is where it's at now. Let's build this new lift station here. Let's boost it from basically Fairway Boulevard up to just past the crown of the hill to where it can hit the gravity outfall. And then let's let gravity do the rest of that work. And so we felt like this was a much better long-term strategy from a pumping cost standpoint, from an impact to those homes all through SSD. From a capacity standpoint, that really becomes this driving force. The problem is you can't build lift 10 without building that red identified 42B project. You've got to have a place for the gravity to take it.
Hey, Mark, is anybody looking at the property directly across from Centennial
Yes.
for development? So that could be done with a development agreement there?
Actually, we talked with the Jacobs family, and they don't have any imminent plans for development there. They did agree just in the last week or two when I talked with them that they would basically identify where that sewer line could go on a street so that it would just go down a street in their development. And basically, I've asked them if they would dedicate the right-of-way for us so that we could just put that sewer line in. If we beat them to the punch, then we could just put that right in, and then they would just connect to it. If they beat us to it, then great. We would have them upsize it, and it would be part of an upsize agreement. So that's why it's kind of, it's either city or developer. The developer one on the 4-3 project, again, you can't build the 4-3 until the 4-2 is built. But that 4-3, it basically takes all of those homes above that dotted blue line, and it moves 300 units of capacity into the gravity system, which basically would give us a few more years before we have to build the lift station.
Would 4-3, could that be done by the neighborhood commercial on the corner down there across from Maverick?
It could. It probably wouldn't be driven by that.
Okay.
It would be driven more by,
Inside Ring Road?
it would be more driven by the homes above Jacobs Ranch. And
Okay.
basically the homes that are, because again, Jacobs Ranch still has some future plats that
Yeah.
they'd like to entitle and build.
And L10 is the project we talked about behind the unbuilt Towns Cove townhouses.
Correct. Yep. And so again, that lift station becomes the control. Now, all of the projects to the south, they are expensive. That's the S26 and the S27. Those projects are great. The problem is it doesn't do you any good to increase the capacity on some of those lines because you still run out of capacity with the lift station. And so it really is kind of a race in the south as to who records first. And then how those recordings take place is really what's going to determine what's going to get built using the existing capacity. So again, from a staff conversation standpoint, there's the balancing act of what's the appropriate way to build or to encourage development so that we get the infrastructure we need that keeps us moving forward. Again, from a staff standpoint, we wouldn't recommend building the yellow lines using city funds at this point. That's developer. If the developers build it, great. The problem is once we run out of lift station capacity, we're going to be kind of at a log jam until someone can step up and build both. Could you go back to that last slide, David? Build the red project lines and the lift station. So they kind of go as a partnership. You can build the red lines with that extra capacity, give us a few more years, continue to collect impact fees, and then hopefully we'd have impact fees that we could spend for that $3.5 million lift station, or at that point we'd have to cross the bridge and say, is this something that we would bond for? One of the council members, as I've been talking with a few of you, asked that we do an analysis and look at what our bonding capacity is with our current rate structure, not changing that rate structure, but within our current rate structure. Again, we've been growing in double digits. So in theory, we may have enough capacity based on how much we've grown, but we'll look at that, and prior to us prioritizing or coming back with a recommendation to bond, we'll evaluate all those things and we'll come back to it. But if we were to bond for anything in the sewer system, my recommendation would be the top 3 projects. That's if you decide from a policy standpoint you want to do that. Not required at this point, but that seems to make the most sense based on where we're at.
Future Ivory project has no impact here.
No. The future Ivory project, go back to that last slide, please. You see the yellow line that's kind of right on the edge of Foothill Boulevard where that's going to be? In essence, we're saying Foothill Boulevard is the demarcation point. In theory, developers could come to us and say, hey, let's just keep flowing down through these neighborhoods. The problem is if we do that, then that gravity outfall line that we just built would become out of capacity. And so we've drawn the Foothill Boulevard as kind of that defining line. We don't want all of these subdivisions to continue to flow down into that lower area, because then we're right back to having to rebuild all that infrastructure. That Foothill Boulevard, as development happens, we want them to build that line and extend it to the south. So that way it's capturing that growth and then ultimately sending it out what will be the future outfall line for that area.
Doesn't Foothill dissect that future project?
It runs right along the edge of those boundaries. So
Okay.
the color coding in the impact fee studies and stuff is really defining which project areas is going to need what projects. So again, our recommendation would be Foothill. We build the sewer as part of Foothill when it goes in, and we drag that all the way out to the TSSD sewer line. And
That's going to have to pump to a certain point also, though.
Oh yeah, they'll have to build a lift station to get it up into that yellow line. And then that yellow line is a future line. We're talking $20+ million, $25 million worth of projects for Toguayo and south of the city to develop.
Yeah.
Hey, Mayor.
He's not here.
He's not here, but go ahead.
Oh, okay. I can't really see on the screen. It's really hard on a work session to be dialing in because you guys are just going and jumping around, which is fine because that's what work sessions are. I just want to have something on the record. My concern is I don't want to be putting things in, even going and getting bonds for projects that make it easier for a developer to develop. So basically, if they want to develop in our city, they need to fork over the cash. I don't want to reduce the barrier of entry because our residents don't like how fast we're growing already as it is. Then to take and make it so much easier for developers to just come into the city whenever. If they have a vested right, yes, applaud it. We have to make sure we have capacity for that. Redundancies to protect our residents, I'm in favor of that. But I'm not a real fan of developing or putting in these things, increasing a whole bunch of capacity, and then allowing a ton more homes to get slammed into the city quicker than would be done if it was done at a more controlled pace with the developer. My last point is on the one table, on the one PowerPoint slide that has the different for the south, the last two need to say city impact fee as well. We can edit that so it's consistent with the rest, unless that is supposed to be a city tax or using other fee methods penalizing the current residents, but I don't think that is the case.
That was not the
Thank you.
case, and my apologies, that was not the case, and in my haste to make some of those edits that were suggested earlier by one of the other council members, I must have missed a couple of things, so my apologies.
Yeah.
And
I
Councilman,
I get that impact fees, future impact fees, but we are floating along, we are paying the interest, even though it's coming out of impact fees, we as a city are still paying that interest, we're still paying for we're limiting what we can bond for, and minimize what we're able to bond from other areas and other things. So I just want to make sure we're keeping all that in mind. But thank you. I'll turn the time back over to you guys there.
and Councilman Comber, this is Councilman Carver, if you can't hear me. I tend to agree with you. I don't want to put us in a position where we're bonding to make development easier on developers in the future. I think if they want to develop here, we welcome them, but they need to carry some responsibility in that. And if we're going to bond, I want it to benefit our current residents today on things like roads or parks, not necessarily giving a future developer the ability to pump their sewer.
And Chris, to your point, I agree, and we're on the same page. The only thing from an infrastructure perspective is if it builds in redundancy, protects them.
Agreed.
In case the pump station goes down, we have some things to protect current residents. And that's where I'm okay with some of those two city funded and impact fee in the north to connect to the gravity line because it creates that redundancy and protects the residents, especially in that northern part. So
Yeah, when we talk redundant culinary water, I totally agree with you there.
yeah.
So
In regards to traffic, though, I'm with them. If we're not encouraging it, we don't need another 750 homes down there, another 1,500 cars making 3,000 trips a day on Redwood. Redwood's already crowded.
That's a good point, Mayor.
Yeah, so, again, I think that's great feedback, we'll factor that in, and again, prior to us having any additional bonding questions down here, we'll need to check the strength of the fund. And again, I really think that the thing that is important on the south end, there's very few developers that are the real big developers that are down on the south end. We're seeing the real big developers typically on the northern half of the city, basically north of Grandview Boulevard.
Yeah.
And so this is one of those things that we could be waiting a very long time for us to collect enough impact fees or for the right developer to come along that would have the ability to build that kind of infrastructure. So again, there's a lot of pieces in play and you've given great feedback and we'll factor that in as we continue.
Well, I think that could encourage developers to, develop in other parts of the city where we're not getting that majority of traffic coming all the way from the south ends.
Before you go on, just one question, if you could go back to it. I think you're talking about S4 2B. you said what you're proposing was less disruptive to the residents of SSD. Is that if we did it sooner? Could you explain that a little bit?
So thank you, that's a great point. So building the lift station 10 and rerouting the sewer up basically to the new gravity outfall line through that S42B, basically what you don't want to do is have your pipes at full capacity. And so basically you design for, what is it, an 80% capacity, Jeremy, is that right? I think you design it and you keep that 20% capacity. The problem that we get is that 20% capacity that's left in the top of the pipe is really going to be potentially an issue in the northern part of SSD, because when you run your pipes that full, yes, they are designed for that, yes, they can run perfectly well, but if there's ever a disruption or hiccup in service, you get flooded sewer basements. Right now, as a city, we have very few basements that get flooded. Typically, the only time we have sewer service interruptions is when we're jetting the lines, and there's a couple of laterals in the city, and we try and adjust for this, but when we're jetting the lines, it blows water up into their sewer line and causes, backsplash in their bathrooms or, something, which is horrible. But it's a design project, it's a design process in a few cases. When you start running at that full capacity for long stretches of time, any sort of a service disruption, Super Bowl Sunday, whatever, you're dealing with the potential for, hitting your full capacity in those lines.
So, thank you. And the reason why, that helps me, and I'm not in disagreement with anything that's been said, but I don't remember who it said, I think it was Councilman McComber, is making sure we're protecting existing residents at the same time. So if we get right up to capacity, that's my concern, especially with the SSD residents. If you're running at the 80%, what you'd call maximum utilization. We have developers who can put a plot down and record and get up to that, then we're out of bandwidth if there's any hiccups.
And how does this factor in all the snipe apartments, ADUs, illegal ADUs?
So that's an important thing, is the development community is pushing right now to require ADUs in all zones. Now, our typical family size is 4.0 people or 4.14 people per household, and that's what our system is being designed for. In Salt Lake City, because they've had so much sprawl and whatever, they're looking at an average right now of, let's call it 2.5 people per household. They have the flex space in their systems to be able to allow for that. But because our population is so high, an ADU discussion that doesn't add bandwidth or that doesn't take up a full ERU in the system could be problematic. And there will be legislation this legislative session that basically forces us to allow those mother-in-law apartments and those additional capacities to be built. So in theory, if that happens, then that 80% is now at truly a max 100%, because there could be enough of that infill ADU development that would gobble up the remainder of that capacity.
So my question then is, we've got ADUs that in our city that we don't know where they're at because we don't authorize them, so they're not regulated in any form.
Right.
Are we already at capacity and don't know it?
So we do, as part of our planning process, we actually go out and I hate to say this, but we measure the flow. And in the sewer system particularly, we're right on track with that. And so that's why we feel comfortable that we have those capacities remaining. And we're again building to that 80%. But make no mistake, developers will propose, hey, let us surcharge. Let us go to 100% capacity until we build that next line. You can surcharge it, and you hope that there's a couple extra feet of gravity between the top of the flow line and the lowest person's basement. Because if you do surcharge, basically you're using up that capacity, and that's where you're going to see backups and things like that. So it's a policy issue, but it's a policy issue that's going to be driven by the legislature this year. And so Jake Andrag, I think, is going to be looking at this issue. And so I'm going to need all of you between now and January to reach out to Jake and encourage him to not basically allow those ADUs on a blanket scenario, but make the cities prove that they have enough capacity in their system before they do that. Because right now, based on our population, we could not allow for that without it potentially having impacts or getting above that 80% line.
Mark, a concern I've heard from a lot of residents on the east side of Redwood, specifically on the south end of SSD, is a bad sewer smell often. backing up into homes on a regular basis.
Of sewer backing into homes?
No, sewer smell backing into homes. It's a common problem. It happens in my house. It's not just a simple pour a cup of water down a P-trap thing. Is that part of the capacity issue we're dealing with, or is that something different?
Jeremy could answer that. Because we have so many lift stations, we do add bioxide and other chemicals to try and kill the smell. But again, when you pump sewer from the marina and then it gets lifted up to this lift 5 right there is right next to the lift station. And any of the sewers that get captured in that don't gravity feed out, again, the longer the sewer takes to get out of the city, the stronger the smell, and the more chemicals we have to use to try and combat the acids that are forming. I think it's a sulfuric acid. Jeremy can correct me on chemistry. That wasn't my strong point.
So the odor is chemicals that we're putting into the system?
We're trying to put chemicals into the system to knock that out.
Yeah, the odor has to do with the sewage, having, sitting in the lift station for a long time. So it's something that will improve as we grow, but when we have new lift stations, like the newer one down in the marina, and not a lot of homes on them, sometimes that sewage can sit in the holding wet well, before it builds up enough in the pump pump. Which as it sits there, it builds up hydrogen sulfide gas, and, that's what they smell. So we've noticed a reduction in complaints as these areas have built and grown, and those lift stations run more frequently. But, you now have another new lift station in Lift 8 down there in Mallard Bay. So it's something that's an issue of a young city with a lot of lift stations that will improve over time as the flows increase. But as Mark points out, we also inject chemicals to try to mitigate, to try to keep the hydrogen sulfide gas in suspension and not have it leave liquid and become a gas.
So Jeremy, I'm not a sewer engineer, but what you're telling me is more ERUs will move the product faster and will have less odor.
Correct.
Yeah, so we have struggled for a long time with complaints on odors. We have noticed that those complaints have reduced as the areas fill in and the sewage moves faster and, doesn't stay in our city as long as those lift stations. It gets pumped out quicker as more flows come in.
They still complain to me, just so you know.
Well, and sorry to add to that, but at least the last almost 7 years now, from out of SSD, those specific homes you're referring to seem to have more of that issue. And so, like, when we go back to what I was saying before, I'm not about, like, tearing down barriers and picking and choosing what developers succeed, but with certain building infrastructure, it benefits existing residents. And I would hate to make it, like, worse for those specific residents, that whole area, and SSD by getting close. It's a little counterintuitive, but having smells and then also a higher likelihood of some type of backup with a hiccup.
The backup's the problem, because what I'm hearing right is we're at 80%. If we go to 90%, the problem of odor gets less.
Maybe, but then you have
The potential's there.
right.
You have to back up into your basement.
Yeah, you don't want the backup.
But your flows are incremental because you only have so many more ERUs, so I don't think your flow would increase substantially, but your smell would be generally consistent on the stinkorometer, whatever you call it.
Smellometer?
Sometimes.
I would just suggest that if you talk to residents who are complaining, the best thing they can do is let us know. And we can look at, there's a couple of different products or strategies we can do to try to assist that. So the more information we get about where those issues are occurring, the more we can try to troubleshoot. Whether we, replace manhole lids that have holes with holes, with those that don't have holes, right where.
From Bliss to Ironwood.
If someone happens to live right where a force pipe discharges into a gravity line, we can look at that. So.
I hear it from Bliss.
Encourage them to call us and let us know where they're having concerns, and we'll do our best to troubleshoot.
From Bliss to Ironwood, I hear it regularly.
Okay.
But I'll tell them to call Public Works.
exactly.
Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't mean to go down that,
thank you.
that manhole there.
And sometimes, the ERUs, for the system to operate optimally, we need to reach those capacities. So again, some growth is good. How we control the growth, obviously the message has been very clear from you tonight. We want to make sure and not subsidize or, subsidize to the point where development's not paying their cost to entry. And at the same time, developers are only required to pay their proportionate share. So again, what we don't want to do is lose economies of scale because we're having multiple developers build more expensive projects that we're going to ultimately have to replace anyway. So again, we want to balance those things out, and we'll try and take a very comprehensive approach in looking at that for the future. The next infrastructure system that we wanted to talk about is really the drinking water system. And so, Jeremy, if I could, I'm going to turn it to you. If you could just walk us through some of these projects real quick and kind of the broader discussion on drinking water, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah, I'll just say you're going to see the same thing on drinking and secondary, which is we have a list, a 10-year project list. They're generally listed in order of priority, and you'll notice at least half, if not more, of the list is already basically lined up and covered. So here you'll see the first two projects are already projects that are underway and funded in the current fiscal year. The next two projects, 3 and 23, are projects that are already queued up with developers. They're agreeing to build them through impact fee credit agreements. And really the only project I think on here that we're looking at using impact fees for is DW6. This would be a pipeline that we would build with the Pony Express extension project, which is really helpful from a redundancy standpoint. So I know a couple of the council members, talked about, the benefits of some of the projects that are benefiting existing residents. Some of you may have heard me say, everything in the south of the city west of Redwood, all the culinary water goes to a single pump station, the one on Grandview, which, has, we really are looking forward to having Project DW06 to provide redundancy. Once this is built, and the plan is to build it with the Pony Express Road project, we would have a true secondary feed of drinking water in the south of the city. So it would pump water from that intersection of 8th West and Pony and then push it south to the top of Grandview. So other than DW6, all the other projects are mostly lined up to be built by developers, and then they'll get reimbursed through impact credit agreements.
DW6.
Yeah, and I like DW6 because you said it built the redundancy. It does, to be clear, it does add capacity still. It allows for more development in the south, but that's an added benefit versus the primary benefit for added capacity. This is to help with redundancy for our residents in the south.
Thank you for clarifying that.
And you said DW6 would be built with Pony Express, but we're talking Foothill Boulevard, right?
Foothill Boulevard extension.
My apologies, yes. With the full extension of the funding that we just, I think we're going to talk about the project later in the presentation. Yeah, with that road extension.
So the $3 million for DW6, in our culinary budget, what's our number in that budget right now because I know that we have to pay part of that back as part of the McLaughlin.
Yeah, so one of the challenges that we have with our drinking water system is we collect roughly $2,300 per ERC or ERU, which is basically a connection, right? We've entered into a reimbursement agreement with the Lake Mountain Mutual Purchase to give the first $2,000 to that reimbursement agreement. Now, it was, I think, originally $24 million. I think we owe about $4.5 million left on it. So for about the next 4 to 5 years, we're still going to be taking 90-some% of all of the money that we collect and pushing it towards that payoff amount. Once that's paid off, then we'll collect the full amount for ourselves. And so, again, our goal and our strategy is to try and, letting development happen, let development cover those projects in the north that build redundancies, that keep their projects moving forward. But our next highest priority, once that project is complete, would be to build that project. Now, if we need to bond for it, I would suggest that there's probably some internal service loans that we could do that potentially may allow us to do that as an internal loan from one fund to another. That would have to be approved by you through a public hearing, and we could go about that process. Ultimately, I think that when we get ready to build Foothill, we'll have that designed as part of that Foothill project. And as we come forward with funding for Foothill, we'll come forward with a funding strategy for that, because again, of all of the projects we're talking about tonight, that's probably the one parallel with Foothill Boulevard that makes the most sense for us to get built today.
Mark, back of the napkin numbers, Lake Mountain Water, $4 million?
4.5-ish.
4.5, okay.
Let's call it 4.5, so that's however many ERUs.
You said we'd entered into agreement. I think it bears
Yeah.
saying that we were compelled to enter an agreement by the courts.
Sorry, this is a lawsuit that was settled back in 2005 that
Yeah.
was still
But it's about 2,200 ERU connections that we still need to make.
correct.
And that's every permitted building permit,
Every ERU. Now, this
Court ordered.
Final plat or preliminary.
culinary.
And it's plats that are recorded. Now, here's the irony, right? This goes back to the accessory dwelling unit conversation that the mayor brought up.
Right.
If those are allowed to come in, then at what point does that become a problem? I would suggest we adopt an ADU policy that if we're going to do accessory dwelling units, that we require them to have their own meters and their own connections. And that way, it's akin to an apartment type analysis.
Absolutely, I think we should do that. Because we have other parts of the city that already allow for accessory dwelling units, so we should have that policy in place when the state legislature screws over the city.
Agreed, Councilman McComber.
We're
I was
right.
just going to bring up one more thing on EW6 is these engineer estimates look at standalone projects. If this piggybacks on a $10 or $14 million road project, it's very possible we get a much better price, hopefully.
If we piggyback on the road project, you're saying?
Yeah. Our hope is that we get some economy of scale with that.
The other project that I think is important to keep our eye on is DW5. The water model shows that we do eventually need more storage in Zone 1. So a lot of our big projects, North Shore, Wander, are all in Zone 1 and are using capacity. And the trigger for needing DW5 is basically the build out of North Shore, the build out of Wander, the build out of Boyer and Church projects there in Zone 1. Now that project is fairly expensive. A lot of it has to do with the long blue connecting pipeline, so that storage tank is currently shown just on the southeast corner of the Mount Saratoga property. And if you were to build it today, you would have to connect it down all the Red Road. Now, North Shore and Wander projects are going to take several years to build out. And when it is time to build new Zone 1 capacity, it's possible that there's a much closer connection and that price could come down. But this could be something that when the church starts bringing in applications and starts, heavily developing its Zone 1 property there, just west of Redwood and South of Coney, those are going to be conversations we're going to need to have about the timing of that new Zone 1 line.
And that brings me back to my comment earlier, and that's the time when they need to decide if Wander and Edge and DR Horton and SLR, then they need to fork it over. They need to build this. I don't care if they don't build the houses right away. In fact, I have thousands of residents who would rather not have those houses come in right away and have them delayed. So that to me is not a redundant sign like the DW06. That one to me, that one is an absolute. And we can start building up our impact fees so that we can, that as the developers come in, we can build that if we need to and when we need to. But again, I don't see that as a priority to reduce the barrier of entry so that we can end up with 1,000 extra homes in the next 5 years.
Yeah, so, thank you.
And you'll see it is at the end of the 10-year. So it is currently, based on our projections, near the end of that 10-year window.
Sorry, you just said though that we needed to keep an eye on it, so that to me is not 10 years. That's 2 city council elections, well, 4 city council elections away.
So Michael, one thing that I want to point out, and also for the rest of the council, that project DW23, the reason that we're showing that where we are is because there's a possibility that we can build some extra capacity in the Mount Saratoga Zone 2 tank that would allow us to kick the ball, and really, we've kind of modeled the $11 million project being at the end of that 10-year window, because if we can build some extra capacity in that DW23, it lets us get more years down the road before we build the $12 million project or the $11 million project. And so again, our hope is that we can get McLaughlin paid off in the next few years. We then can hopefully get that DW23 project built, which gets us that capacity that lets us float until the end of that 10-year window. And that would give us, 4 to 6 years of revenue collections where we're keeping all of the impact fees to be able to cash fund that type of a project. So Councilmember McComber, you're spot on. And again, the strategy that we're looking at is can we prioritize that tank, build a little extra capacity in that tank, and then let that ball really roll as long as possible for that $11 million project.
But 6 is all we need for the redundancy in the south.
Yeah, 6 is all we need for redundancy.
Yeah, that creates our loop.
So Mark, real quick, the DW23, the one we're just talking about, the 4 million, that's for the whole tank. What is our upsizing capacity cost?
Again, that's a great question. If you can let us, we'll look that up and we'll get back to you. Again, I think Edge has to build a portion of that tank for servicing their project. And then, we'd look to upsize that. We'd be looking at a potential upsize there for the economies of scale on that. So again.
Right. So we had this conversation before too, because if you were a resident and you got this debt because it's public record and you started seeing 24 million, 12 million, 16 million, you'd start crapping your pants and you're thinking, what the hell is the city council doing? So I would really love to be able to see, here's the developer's costs, here's the potential for a city, Russ, it doesn't have to be a potential with a 20% cushion, city impact fee. So maybe it's only 2.5 million of that 4.3 million that the city would really be responsible for an upside. I'm just saying, right? It's just an example.
Yeah.
Well, that's a lot different. That starts dropping these numbers down dramatically. When I see developer / city impact fee, what is that real mix?
Yeah. So Councilmember McComber, you hit the exact point. In our impact fee study, it will actually show those numbers.
Okay.
We're giving you a much smaller summary. So again, I apologize. This discussion is coming a little bit before you're going to see all those other projects. But that actually, Michael, is perfect because that's a segue into that study will say 60% developer, X%, for this. It could say 100% future growth. And then of that, we would be able to say, okay, Mount Saratoga needs 60% of it, and that extra 40% would be us basically trying to capture that buy-in time. Again, that's the punt. The Project 23 lets us punt building that $11 million tank for that 10-year window is what we're hoping for.
Yes, and I'm all for upsizing things when we're building them. It drives me nuts that Pioneer Crossing has been done 3 times and it's not even close to where it's going to be. That I think it's a waste of money. So I'm in favor of that, but it's just one of those numbers. So I appreciate looking forward to seeing those when we get the impact fee study in the future. Thank you.
And in my mind, the only way that the $11 million one happens any sooner is if it's directly paid by a developer who wants to build now.
Sure.
I have no problem with that.
Yeah.
Mayor and council, anytime you have a system improvement that's listed in our IFFP, it is a developer paid improvement. And even though it looks like a large number, it is being funded by development through impact fees directly.
But much of the interest is not covered, is it, Kevin?
Yeah, the interest is covered, everything is covered, the interest, the engineering fees, consulting fees, everything is covered. Everything that's called a system improvement in our IFFP is paid through development.
So when we did our gravity system, and we spent all that money, we went out and bonded it. the impact fees came back in and paid all of that and all that interest?
They will.
Well, yeah, once you bond for and complete improvements, you can reimburse yourself through impact fees. And that's fine. I'm not sure all the details. Mark can speak to that, but that's a little bit different. But when you see the rest of, I think that's one of the only situations where we bonded. The rest of it's paid through impact fees and what's termed as system improvements.
I think that they're looking to have us bond again, that's why I mentioned that. Thank you.
Yeah, but you can get reimbursed for that, and I believe that we built that into our IFFE in our impact studies.
Yeah, and again, we.
That's correct, Kevin. I just sent that information actually over to the consultant, so Shalice got me all the information, including interest and everything that we did on our 2018 sewer bond, and that'll all be part of the new impact fee analysis, interest and everything.
Yeah.
So the
That's
challenge
great.
with
That's
that,
exactly what you should do.
the challenge with that is, and I want to make sure that we're clear on this, is we don't get, the last person that builds the last building permit in the system is really when ultimately some of these things get finally paid off. Because everybody has to pay their proportionate share, it really, it becomes a financing mechanism. Again, what we're trying to do, and we've been very successful, is we've gotten, many, many millions of dollars from developers to pre-build some of these big projects, and then they get credits, and then they use those credits ultimately, and basically they reimburse themselves as they build the infrastructure. So we've been very successful with that, and when we bring back the larger discussion, we'll bring back some of those numbers that we have in outstanding credits and things like that. But again, it's right along the same philosophy lines, which is development pays for it. Again, we got ahead on sewer because we were kind of behind the 8 ball on some of those issues. Again, our hope is that through these projects, we can basically build what we need to build, and then we kind of let development kind of help us build some of these other things. So let's move to secondary water. This is a similar analysis as the drinking water system. Jeremy, could you walk us through this analysis?
Yeah, so you'll notice it's very similar to the drinking water in that you can get through almost half of the list. We already have lined out all these projects, I think all the way down to SW6. So you see the first 5 projects are already either budgeted or we're working with various developers or projects to get them built. So that's already lined up. That's through SW2. Then you look through the next, I think, 5 projects through SW6. We already have, we're in discussions with those developers. They're going to upsize infrastructure as they build, and then get recouped through impact fee credit agreements. And that takes us basically down to SW9 and SW11. These are, again, these are redundancy projects. So SW9 is a new well in Jacobs Ranch. The existing Jacobs Ranch well is one of the biggest producers of secondary water. So to have a redundant system that can provide reliability to residents, that would be a second well. We know that aquifer is productive. So drilling a new well out in the future, whether that's 6 or 7 years out or whenever that is, we'll make sure that in a worst case scenario we can still provide and meet the needs of our residents. Same thing with SW11. That's the well the city bought from McLaughlin up in Willow Park that's never been equipped. So at some point we want to equip that and again have redundancy and sufficient source options for our residents. And then you get into projects 14, 15, and 16, or 14 and 15. Those are again projects that the developer, DAI will build, and then we'll upsize and work with them on credit agreements. And then the last project, SW16, is also a redundancy project. So North Shore was brought in the first infrastructure for secondary water to the river, and that's going to be sufficient for a long, long time. But eventually, for redundancy, for our build-out system, we're going to want 2 different sources to the east of the river, so that we, if something came up and a line went down, we can continue to provide So SW16 is a secondary water feed across the river to that area of the city east of the Jordan River.
And that should say city impact fees, not just city. So that would be an impact fee project as well.
I think it's worth noting, because I hear a lot, why isn't the city planning ahead? Why are we running out of water? Blah, 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 blah. All these things. I hear these all the time from residents. I think it's worth noting that we have perhaps the next 6 years, not only planned, but the funding identified for projects to take us out 6-7 years into the future.
And it's all developer paid.
And the vast majority of it is developer paid. Those top projects are
Well, it says city, I would imagine that's,
ones I think are ones we've already budgeted.
We've got those in this year's budget and we're moving forward.
but they're paid by impact fees, that's slash, so that's,
Developer paid.
yeah, I mean, I know this is kind of nitpicky, and I think I suggested impact fee, but I almost wonder if you remove city and just call it impact fee, because that's what it is.
Sure. We can do that. And again, there's one that's an anomaly. It's the Pirelli pipeline. I put RA, which is a reimbursement agreement. A lot of these will have reimbursement agreements. I didn't, for consistency's sake, I didn't get those on all of these various projects. But again, just in concept, this is what we're trying to do. Again, when you see these impact fee studies in the coming weeks, we'd encourage you to come and ask questions. We'd be happy to sit down with you. There's many other projects that are outside that 10-year window, and we're just predominantly focused on what needs to get built in the next, in the next 10-year window, which is really our next funding cycle.
Was this version in Dropbox?
No, I updated this based on some of the comments that we've received as we've had conversations with you all.
Okay. I downloaded it to just this afternoon.
Right. And we've just updated that. Jeremy, do you want to tackle storm drain? Better question, will you tackle storm drain?
It's a request.
Storm drain's a little different. It's not a singular system. It doesn't have a model capacity per se, dozens of different individual standalone systems. And it's much more developer driven in that typically we don't get ahead of development. We let development build and then we work with them to get the master plan infrastructure built. The only exception is where we've been successful in getting, grants and things like that. So, on the left, you'll see there's a project we've been working on for the debris basin above Lake United States. We have the FEMA and NRCS grants, and we were able to get a little more money with the nullifier. In the center slide, those are a variety of projects that we're piggybacking on, either subdivisions, or for instance, with the Crossroads widening project, we're piggybacking on that, doing project 18B. We did project EN2 when we did the Pony Express widening. And on the east slide, there's a couple of projects that we piggybacked on with DR Horton and Pirelli and got our master plan infrastructure built again through upsize agreements. And so, we'll just continue, I think, to stay that course. It's been very successful for us. We have our master plan and the developers come in. If it's somewhere where we need to work with them to upsize, we do that through impact fee credits. So that'll continue to be the course, and it'll just depend on where development occurs as far as our future projects occur.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on the storm drain system? Okay, next slide, please, David. So roads, I'll tackle this one. We're showing two major road projects. The first one is Pony Express Extension, and that's going to extend from Redwood Road to basically to the river, to the old Saratoga Road. That's the first phase. The second phase is what we just got MAG funding for. The MAG funding was for $585,000 ballpark. We're going to hold off on anything that's east of Redwood Road until DR Horton basically builds their North Shore phase, and then we would build the final piece that they're not required to build with that Pony Express MAG money. The reason
Mark, I'm sorry, I want to clarify. Did you mean east of Saratoga Road? I think you said Redwood Road.
Sorry, east of the river. East of the river.
Okay.
So thank you. Thanks for that clarification. You sometimes lose track of what you're presenting. Anyway, so the bottom line is we're going to build to the river and to Old Saratoga Road. That project is funded. We're excited about that. That project is under design. We hope to go out for bid for that this fall, and we hope that next summer we're finishing building that road to basically Old Saratoga Road. There's some progress that we've made out there in the past. Like, for example, you may notice there's kind of a trench that's out there. When we did our sewer project, rather than backfill up to the native level, we let them keep that down. So basically, we're going to be building from the subgrade up. So that saved us a little bit of money in some of those areas for that project. So we're trying to be as efficient as we can in this. But that project is ready to go. So we'll be bidding that out. That's funded through MAG, and we're excited about that. That's about, Jeremy, $3.4 million, if I remember correctly. And then we build that last almost 600,000 segment with DR Horton, with North Shore in the future. The other one,
Hey, Mark, what is North Shore built out there today? Because they've got something poured out there now.
So
is that not their portion they've done?
they're going to be building that segment. So if you notice in that Pony Express Parkway, if you can see there's a little yellow line. Basically, they're going to be required to build that full yellow line as part of their project. And then we're working with them on upsizing that road.
Because they've built some behind their townhouses now.
What's been built is about, is the east half of their obligation. They have about that same distance to the west.
Okay, and does
They'll build and they finish those plats. And then what's left, if you look at the slide there, what we left is that little blue gap on the Utah County parcel.
Does the new funding that we just got, or the old funding, the 3.5, does it upsize the bridge at all?
No, we're not touching the bridge at this point. The bridge is going to be probably a $10 million project at some point in the future.
Okay.
Our goal is to widen Pony Express, have it narrow down as it crosses the bridge, and then flare back out again.
Open back up.
Our goal is, and we've been talking with UDOT about this quite a bit, our goal is to get the road built and pioneered, and then our goal would be to request that it become a state road, and we hand it over to the state and it become a state-funded road. It may be a MAG-funded expansion of that bridge in the future, kind of like what we're doing here over on Crossroads Boulevard, which again, as long as it's MAG-funded, we're good with that. But for now, the intent is to not touch that bridge until some future point. Granted, once we get this road built, we'll probably, and I regret to say this, I think Michael made a comment earlier about how we've had to widen Pony a couple of times. Well, that's unfortunately how the MAG funding game works. And so probably as soon as we open that, people are going to be clamoring for it to widen up and get bigger. Again, once we finish that east of the river connection over to 2300, we'll be ready to talk expansion and widening. But really, that's going to then beg the question of expanding and widening that whole road over to Lehigh and Loch Lomond. And there's going to be all kinds of conversations.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're going to pull so much traffic, Eagle Mountain traffic, off of Redwood. They're going to either go up Riverside or go up Old Saratoga Road or continue through Lehigh. That bottleneck on that bridge could be a problem in the morning.
Yeah, it could be.
One thing I want to bring up is MAG funding is a 2-year cycle. So I think currently that is our plan in 2 years to go back and make that one of our project requests, is to replace the bridge and widen all the way to 2300. The other thing is, if you look at our current design, the Pony Express from Redwood to Bridge through the roundabout, you'll notice that we are doing the full 5 lanes between Redwood Road and the roundabout with this first phase. And that was based on traffic modeling and looking at the plan. So we are going to have the full 5 lanes. That'll help eliminate a lot of bottlenecks, because at that point they can peel off north on Riverside and reduce the traffic. And then east of the roundabout, it will reduce down to 2 lanes, to tie in the bridge. And then, again, in 2 years, we can come back and look for funding to finish that project all the way to 2300.
And the reason this is important is if it's a MAG-funded project, we're on the hook for 6.3% of the project as opposed to 100% of the project.
Yeah.
That's typically.
You're sitting at our Costco and it says you're in Lehigh. So we gotta start being more bold and pushing back on these types of documents as we created. Where is it 2300 when it's in Saratoga Springs? Saratoga Road, and that corner is Saratoga Road. I'm so frustrated with Lehigh getting their name dominated over ours when we were here since 1908. It's been called Saratoga Road.
Thank you. We'll push that back to them. Again, our concern from a fundamental standpoint is 6% we think is a fair match, especially for what's going to be a regional road. We think that we should, expand that bridge and do the other things, going back to your initial question. The project that we're really excited about, and this is something that you as a council have prioritized for us, we were successful in receiving funding for Foothill Boulevard. We weren't as successful as we hoped we would be. We'd requested originally $10 million, and the city agreed that it would fund roughly $6 million of our project budget. So far, we have $700,000 that we've set aside as a city to begin the designing and engineering of this. We are going to go back to MAG. They only funded us at $8.5 million. We're going to go back to them and look for an amendment to this to try and get us back up to the 10 million. We think that this is a very regionally significant project, and basically the cost estimating is what kind of took it down. Their cost estimation is that you use UDOT's standards for designing your road. Well, they did that, and then they basically said, we're going to take 15% off because you're a city road, you don't have to build it to UDOT standards. The difficult part of this is we actually designed this road so that we could turn these lanes of road over to UDOT when this becomes a state road. And so we do need to build it to the UDOT standards. That's part of what we've talked with them about. And so we'll be going back to that funding. Again, we're excited because you as a council had the foresight to approve the budget for $700,000 that lets us begin designing this. Meanwhile, we can go back with better cost estimates and with other things, petition for more funding, and hopefully have a pretty good strategy on funding. This is one of those conversations that we're going to need to have of how do we build this? If it's a $16 million project, we're going to need to bond for that. And then what we would do is we'd set that bond up so that 10 million of it, as soon as the funding becomes available for MAG, could get paid off and get knocked off of it. And then the remaining 6 million would be our responsibility. And we could fund that with impact fees that we collect between now and when we get the full reimbursement. We have a couple $1 million that we could probably prioritize that we've collected in road impact fees that could be used towards that. And so again, we're going to look at looking at different ways that we can try and get this project funded and hopefully done as quickly as possible. But again, you all have directed us to prioritize that, and that's the priority that we're working on right now. We would like to get a reimbursement agreement in place with the county prior to us actually beginning and awarding contract for the design, just because we want to make sure that we've got that being counted towards our match. We don't want them to pull another fast one on us and come back and say, hey, you got to come up with more match. We want that 700,000 to count as our match towards this project. So again, that's pretty much the road projects that we're prioritizing. The transportation master plan that's going to be coming to you in a couple of weeks. It's going to the planning commission next, and then it'll come to you. Actually, it already went. Yeah, I went to them last week. I forgot. Or 2 weeks ago. That'll be coming to you at your next council meeting, and you can take a look at that. Again, lots of projects there. Trails, Jeremy, would you tackle this slide for us, please?
Hey, Mark.
Yeah, Chris.
Just on roads. To me, that's as exciting as a Costco announcement. Maybe I'm just a road nerd, but I've been here for a long time. We have one resident in the room and 2 watching on YouTube. I wish more people knew about this today because this is some of the biggest news I think our city's going to have in a long time.
Yeah, I got these infographics to Dave, so Dave maybe can.
We got them today, and they should be up hopefully tomorrow.
Can we fix them with Michael's comment before we push them out, please?
If possible, yeah.
And David, can you share?
Have Jeremy edit those before we put them out.
2300 west of Saratoga Road.
And Dave, when you put those on the construction site on our site, we talked about it before, if you could just let us know. I'd love to be able to share that. I think other people would like to share it. Again, I think this is a big deal.
Right, and once I get those edits from Jeremy, then we'll get them on tomorrow.
Thank you.
Jeremy, would you hit our next slide?
Yeah.
Trails?
David, you could jump back to the other slide. Okay, so I'm gonna start with the right. On the right, is the existing trail project that, if you remember, took us 2 years to get a wetland permit. It is gonna begin construction actually November 2nd, is what I hear. It's going to complete the last 2 missing segments of the shoreline trail in SSD, so again, if you're excited about trails, this is a pretty cool thing, for 20 years in the making, in that we've always had these 2 gaps in the shoreline trail, and we'll finally be able to complete them. The hot segments you can see labeled there, completes the gap from the roundabout basically, at SSD down to where the trail currently begins, on the south end of that red line, about 1,500 feet south on the marina. So that's the hot segment, and then the other one is the Amanda Lane segment. That begins at Eagle Park, and then proceeds south to one of the city's lift stations, where the trail begins currently. So I'm pretty excited about that. We secured funding about 4 years ago, and have been beating our heads with the Army Corps, but finally got approved. On the left, this is, I believe, one of the council's directives was to try to fill in some of these missing gaps in the Redwood Road Trail segments. So there's a preliminary budget that was put together of $750,000. That was somewhat of a rough and dirty estimate because there's a lot of unknown conditions. But we've hired a consultant, we've requested proposals, hired a consultant, and they're currently working on these designs. You'll see in the very north, on segment A, that's the trail behind, is that Riverview? I apologize. It's on Aspen Hill Boulevard. On the middle slide, segment B, these are missing Redwood Road trails, north and south of Ring Road. Maverick built a little piece there, so it would connect the trail from Maverick north to Lakeview Terrace and south to Jacob's Ranch. And on the bottom slide, segments C and D are down there south by just segments. C segments are just south of Wildlife Boulevard, and then the D segments are there by Harper Parkway. So as the consultant gets out there to survey, there's utility investigations, grading permits, grading evaluations, we'll better know if our budget will cover all of these projects, or if we may find 1 or 2 segments have unique challenges, uncooperative property owners, etc. So we'll come back to the council in the future with more detail as the preliminary engineering gets underway. But we're hopeful right now that we can build all these segments with the current $700,000 budget.
And from a prioritization standpoint, depending on how far the money goes, we would recommend building those segments where there's no segments. Obviously, there's going to be some finagling. There's some trails that people have been asking for years that we'd love to do that might be off of Redwood Road. And we're going to basically start working on another comprehensive list off of Redwood Road. This is one of those trails that is off Redwood Road. We were recently asked to go ahead and take a look at the Lakeshore Trail and figure out, okay, most of this trail is basically road-based right now. There is a segment on the very south end, and you can see in the far right slide, there's a yellow segment, and that actually has concrete. The rest of it, though, is going to either be built with this Amanda Lane project that Jeremy just talked about, and there's going to be these gaps where we're missing some segments of that trail. So again, this was us just trying to quantify what it might take to build it. This is a little bit more complicated because in some areas we have the trail that's on private property. It was built on the back of someone's property, so we're going to have to work with getting easements and things like that.
That's the next slide.
I'm sorry. So we're talking about, sorry. Go back down.
So you have an SSD Lakeshore trail. Yeah, okay, yeah.
So there's the graphic kind of shows the challenges that we've got with some of these things. So again, there are things that we're going to need to work through, and again, we'll prioritize in future years how we go about building those missing sections. Any questions on this particular slide? Again,
I just have a quick question on the previous slide. Is the C and D the ones we talked about to provide walking paths for the new elementary?
Yes.
It just bridges those gaps? All right.
Bridging those gaps. And again, our goal on those would be to build those segments prior to the school opening next August.
Right.
So that you can actually walk from basically Heron Hills or Mallard Bay down to that south school, depending on where people are being sent to.
And this, once these A, B, C, and D are completed, you'd be able to walk from the south end of the city to north of Crossroads Boulevard on trails.
There is one segment from basically north of Delmore Meadows to basically Crossroads here. That would need to get built as part of that
Across the
project.
street property and properties.
In theory, if we wanted to build it sooner, we could do a reimbursement agreement, we could build it and then get funded in 2 years or something like that,
But those will come in with those developments.
yeah.
But I mean, you know, we're finally connecting that trail.
So like with the Osmond property, they'll build their segment, but then we've got a segment basically for the Chew property.
Yeah, that's the missing piece.
Yeah, and then we've also got north of there, you've got a missing segment of it was Times Square, I don't know what it's called these days. Anyway, there's just those missing pieces. So we're really, really excited as a city to be kind of closing all these gaps, and, you know, we appreciate kind of your, you know, allowing us to kind of work on some of these projects. We think they're going to be very successful.
So real quick, I just want to thank all the efforts here as well. I'm so grateful to see this as something that has been on my radar for many, many years. A decade now, I'm trying to get some of these things done, so I'm very excited to see this. One thing I want to make sure that's clear is now that we're going to be starting on Amanda Lane, as soon as we start any work there, we can then go to Wiltshire Estates. They have to build their section because their agreement, if you all remember, when we gave them the ability to go up into the Saratoga Springs development and use that as their trail, was as soon as Amanda Lane started getting built, they had to build their connection from the end of Amanda Lane to the north side of Eagle Park. So we need to reach out to them and let them know that they're going to be responsible for that and that they won't be getting new occupancy permits until they start working on it.
So, Jeremy, I think they posted a bond, and I don't recall if that bond was just for us to pull to help build some of these segments or what, but we'll dig into that, Councilmember McComber, and we'll get back to you on that one.
Thank you.
Yeah, Councilmember McConnell, we've talked about that as staff, and we remembered about that obligation and that bond. So that's our plan right now. It's a cash bond that's sitting in the city that we're planning on using that to help out some of this realm.
Great, thank you.
Going back to our slide presentation, I believe the next one is our parks discussion. Again, this one is really kind of a concept. The South Marina, I mentioned this at our last council meeting. That project was originally $2.1 million. It was supposed to be a 50-50 match. Kind of at the last minute, although the funding committee recommended a 50-50 match, the county commission recommended reducing that by 15%. So we got shorted. What should have been about a $1.2 million grant was reduced down to about $746,000. So fundamentally, I would encourage you to reach out to your county commissioners and ask them to reinstate that funding that was recommended by that TRCC granting board. Frankly, we were given the impression that we would be a 50-50 match when we applied for it. And after all of the submittals were done is when we were informed that they wanted to change that funding mechanism. We believe that we have vastly exceeded that match. When you look at our previous investments, that was not taken into consideration as part of our match. When Vineyard was funded, they were not given a specific match requirements because their future improvements would more than cover that. Frankly, I think it's an equity issue. And, you know, from an elected official standpoint, it's really a conversation you need to have with your peers on the county commission and ask them to please consider all of the millions of dollars we've invested into this property and count that match and get us back up to that 50-50 match. This is money that they've collected in previous years, and so it's funding that is available. And this merely was kind of a last-minute adjustment, but that's entirely up to you. Again, without that match, we would be looking to try and find some funding to make this work. But if your direction is ultimately to prioritize this, take the match and move forward, we'd reach out to the Army Corps of Engineers. We'd start working on a permit that would let us build the jetty. And basically, we build as much as we can for the funding that we've got available.
We get a grant over the next 5 years while we're waiting for the Army Corps to get on there.
This is going to be an interesting one because I think building a jetty is not so, we'll see. It's really not impacting wetlands, it's building in the lake. So this one might have a slightly different process, but we'll start working on that right away. The next project is really.
Hey, Mark, on that project, before we move on that project, something I'd like to see, because I want to see this project happen. I think this brings a lot of benefit to our current residents. It brings people into our city. But part of this, I know that the entire park around Spinnaker and McGregor is future, not part of this funding. I think it would be good for the residents in that area if we could park strip Spinnaker, McGregor, and Harbor Parkway as part of this in some way. To create a 15, 20-foot buffer zone between natural grasses. Yes, keep it in the interior.
The demarcation between natural and.
Yes, to clean, I've heard it from the people who live on those roads loud and clear. You may have as well, being close down there, that they want that cleaned up a little bit.
Yeah.
They've been promised that cleaned up for a long time. So I don't know what that adds to a number as far as long-term maintenance and just installation.
Yeah.
But I'd like to see that in a plan somewhere.
So one of the things that becomes a very difficult part, and I apologize because some of this is things that we talk about as staff and we don't really get a chance to communicate. This park really has been waiting for about almost $500,000 contribution from Catalina Bay. Catalina Bay agreed, they were supposed to fund some open space. We phased their project so that they would be paying for that open space. We just now have started to receive several $100,000 of that. So I think we've collected, I want to say around $250,000. And so the problem is we were going to use some of that money to make some of those final improvements.
Yep.
So us getting shorted on the funding from the county means that instead of us finishing up the park and doing some of those types of things that would get us until we're ready to finish building this out 100%, we're going to now have to use to replace the match that we're missing. Again, we were hoping to use that match in future years to go and apply for more money to finish building the rest of that park. Now we're going to have to cannibalize it for this portion of the match. But to your point, we absolutely know that that's one of the things that we're looking at doing, and we were anticipating trying to get that done based on the available funding.
Well, if they're paying, is that a fee in lieu?
It's part of the fee in lieu open space that was required.
Okay.
And really, it started off as Harbor Bay, and then the next developer bought it out of foreclosure, and it became Catalina Bay.
Got it.
And so that carried on with them to meet their open space.
See, I think that money should stay in that park project
Absolutely.
and not going towards the marina side of it. That's money that is for their open space for that park. Now, that's a city park though,
Correct.
right? It's city. It's not HOA or something.
No, city
Okay.
park. And again, it's that funding gap now of that extra $500,000 that just was taken off the table with them realigning that 15%.
Okay.
The next park was Sunrise Meadows Park. Again, we budgeted $300,000 this year when we amended the budget, and Jeremy's working right now with the designer. The lighter green areas and all of those trees are awesome. It's an artist rendition. What we're looking to do is really finish off that detention basin that is currently a vacated detention basin, build some more trails through there, kind of complete a walking trail through there, connect that trail over to Talus Ridge, and work towards connecting it to Talus Ridge, but then also really building some green space along there. So we're getting some designs done for you. We're going to spend a few $1,000s to get those concepts built. And then our goal would be to fund as much of that or as, to what extent we want to go. But again, just kind of round out and finish up some of those issues. The next slide is really kind of the three other big park projects that are kind of looming out there. The North Marina, we put $500,000 aside to dredge that marina if conditions were favorable. And again, we wanted to use that for match for other things before we went out and did it. So again, in theory, if you wanted to take and move this $500,000 to the other marina, that would close the gap. And then we look at future years of putting more money aside that we would then leverage for match for dredging and things out here.
Any
Again,
feedback from Lehigh on this?
Yeah, they're not so interested right now.
Okay, is that the official response?
That's what I'd heard back from them. I didn't receive a formal letter or anything like that. I could ask for that, but again, they're not inclined to move forward with it. They certainly support it. They certainly wouldn't object to it, but I think that they
Well, I
see.
can't object to it, it's ours.
Yeah, well, I think they see that their residents will get benefit for it anyway, so why become partners?
So the non-resident rate just got it more expensive.
Yes, we're gonna triple the non-resident rate.
That is,
Well, I don't want to be punitive, but, I mean, yeah, just Lehigh, yeah, just Lehigh.
well, to be fair, Eagle Mountain was given the same option and they declined as well. So again, let's continue to work on those relationships where we're not doing anything eminently. Let's keep building those relationships and see if there's some future for us.
Councils change.
Let's not burn bridges, but let's certainly look for opportunities to go forward. Go back to that last slide, please, David. The second project would be Patriot Park Phase 2, and this is really the purchase for that pink area that you see in that center picture. Some of that will be drawn down with our extension of Pony Express. I will say that from a priority standpoint, we have till 2024 to finish buying this property. As far as our purchase agreement goes, I strongly recommend that be one of the next projects that we fund. How we fund it is going to be a different conversation, but again, it's an important parcel for us to round out that roughly 150 acres that we have between Inlet Park and Patriot Park in this area.
Well, I think to your point, Mark, you know, the addition, I mean, Pony Express is going in next summer. That's going to increase, we don't have a guaranteed price. We have a guaranteed floor that we have to pay them, but we're going to end up paying market price. And so we have several things that are going to increase the value of that property before 2024, whenever our option expires. So the sooner we can get that off the books and taken care of, I think.
I agree with that.
I had that conversation with Jeremy and Owen just yesterday. I agree. I think we need to know what this looks like now and not wait till next summer, because Pony will increase the value of that land.
Because then it becomes infinitely more developed.
Yes.
So as we're getting appraisals for the Pony property, we can probably use those same appraisals for the discussion point on that. So we'll bring that back once we've got those.
And what is our bonding ability, can we do that here, and what's it look like?
Yes.
Do we have the capacity to do that?
Again, it depends on how much of that capacity gets consumed with Foothill Boulevard. And if I'm given a choice between Foothill Boulevard or this park, I'd say you take and you bond for Foothill, because around 2024 is when we get the funding reimbursed from Foothill that frees up that capacity, and it's that shell game of capacity.
Just becomes a lot more expensive potentially.
Right, but again, let's cross that when we get more into the funding portion of this discussion in the near future. So the last park is really Performance or Encore Park, as some have called it. That project, we need to build it by the 2,000th home. That's what our development agreement triggers. Right now, they're about 1,000 homes in, so we're still a ways away. Again, going back to the sewer conversation, if that sewer capacity is eaten up, that might be a while until that gets built. So again, it's on the radar. We just want to keep that on the radar for you as we look towards that. Next slide, please. This is a project that was recently brought to us by Chief Campbell in the fire department. This would be at the North Fire Station, and it would be immediately west of the current fire base. What Jess has asked is kind of an interesting, intriguing question. Since the CARES Act money came in and we were able to fund so much of the fire station this year using CARES Act funding, his request was, could we turn some of that into funding availability for this extension of the fire station? Again, we collected the $2.4 million. We've capped out on our CARES Act money. We're still tracking expenses in case there's any other pots of money that are available by the end of the funding cycle, and we can step in and take other funding that may be available. Again, I think certain agencies across the state are struggling to actually spend their allotments. And so we're still tracking our expenses and we're queuing ourselves up so that we can help resolve that funding issue as opposed to sending it all back to Washington in a few months. But Jess's question was, and it's a legit question, rather than us build additional storage down at Public Works, could we take some of that savings, if you would, from the CARES Act, and basically, because of the CARES Act, could we take and redirect $250,000 to build this extension? Now, he was proposing a flat roof. I would propose that we actually, have some sort of architectural roof element off of the existing building, so that we, get some gable or something like that. But again, that was Jess' request, and I think it's a legit conversation. It really, we're storing some of our very valuable equipment outdoors right now. In the winter months, we have to winterize it, and it's just, from a space standpoint, how do we go about, making that available?
I think that's a fair request, and also I agree with the pitched roof, because I know we've had significant discussions with certain developers about not having roofs that aren't pitched enough.
Well, and you can see the dotted line which shows the pitch on there. Again, I don't want to have to fight that fight. Jess came back with some drawings that I thought were very intriguing. Again, give this to the fire department for a lot of impetus on their part. And again, some cities are doing these types of projects using the CARES Act money, but again, from a construction standpoint, since we were able to book all of that to personnel expenses, which is the easiest way to kind of secure that source, I thought it was an intriguing conversation if you guys were willing to listen.
There's no way to finagle any of that CARES Act money into our future commitment on firefighter headcount?
No. But I will say this, the SAFER grant that we were awarded.
Yes.
Instead of it going 75, 50, 25, it's staying at that amount the whole 3 years.
75 amount?
Because of the CARES Act. So actually, in and of itself, that's more than enough to cover this.
Yes.
In that 3-year window. So again, Jess, I think Chief Campbell came forward with a request when it just, all the stars aligned, and we can probably easily justify it.
Yeah, I support that.
Yeah.
So are you okay if we do a budget amendment and get going on some design work?
Absolutely.
Is that in the grass median, they're gonna tear all that out in the parking over there?
Yeah, they're gonna get rid of some of their open space.
Okay.
And again, the thought is since we're developing that park right next door.
Yeah.
It's taking care of that. It would largely use the same apron to leave the building. And again, it's more for the overflow equipment, not necessarily, all of their response. It's for the backup ambulance. It's for the brush truck, in the off-season when.
Is the ladder truck going here?
The ladder truck will go in that,
The main bay?
in the main bay there. So again, next slide, please, David. These are just some projects that are still out there to be determined on some of those. The library, we found that there's a needs assessment grant that's there. We're going to be applying for that and then have that help us shape the discussion for what size facility we build. So we're going to be looking at applying and going out for that. The construction on that, $3 to $5 million, depending on how big of a facility we look at. And, there's a lot of conditions in there, but again, just as a placeholder, the well property, we came back, we needed to do some mold remediation, needed to redo the foundation, we needed to do the power, and we need to re-roof it. A little under $50,000. The question is, to rent it out for what we think would be market, we'd have to rent it out for over 4 years to be able to recoup just this $50,000. And again, it's us getting into kind of the rental game. Or do we look at just taking that money and using it for demo and not worrying about that?
What department would be responsible for, I know we've talked about this before, and I just don't have a good memory about this, but I'm not in favor of us.
Yeah,
Right, that's where I'm going.
I don't agree with government being a rental landlord.
Some
Yeah.
cities do affordable housing projects, and they take money from their redevelopment agencies and put it towards these kinds of things. Again, for a one-off project, I'm not sure that it's worth the value, and I'm not sure it's worth the effort that it will take to manage. And yes, we can put contracts in place, but basically, someone on staff's time is going to have to find the capacity to now become a landlord and manage the landlord portion of that.
If we,
I'd rather let the fire department burn it down in practice.
If we were talking about an apartment complex or something that would actually like address a need for a segment of community, that's one thing, but this is one house, so.
Well, then we'll shift towards that. Is there consensus among the council on that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And if the police and fire are gonna play with the building, let us know.
Oh, trust me, they want to knock doors down, and we let the police use it for training.
Yeah, it's fun to go watch. I
Yeah.
wanna go watch.
I wanna go watch.
We explicitly made it a condition that they not break anything since we weren't sure which direction we were going, and we didn't want to cause more damage. So,
Yeah, now they can play.
We'll work on that, and we'll have them use it as a training thing as we get ready to do the demo.
Do we know what the demo cost is?
No, but we'll look into it.
Well, fire could demo it pretty quick.
That'll get
And
a
then
lot
you got
of your,
hazard material cleanup.
That'll get a lot of your scale weight gone at the landfill.
Too much excitement and give them too much excitement for being able to torch something yet. Let us pull those things together.
All right.
Let's see, and that was the last slide we had.
Public works, storage and maintenance, a mechanic.
That was one of the projects, yeah.
We did look at some additional storage. Again, given COVID this year, we haven't moved forward with the fleet manager position recruitment yet. We're looking at getting going on that. Again, with so many moving parts and so many pieces, it just wasn't convenient. It has been budgeted this year. We are ready to move forward with that, so we'll start that recruitment and get going on that. But again, until we can ascertain some of the big fleet discussion conversations, we don't want to commit to buildings yet, but that's a conversation that will be coming back. Again, on the broader spectrum, and we'll get into this when we start talking financing, most of the things that we've talked about, with the exception of kind of the last slide, which is really kind of buildings, most of everything else is going to be funded with impact fees and development-related fees. Again, bonding capacity is going to be tricky. One of the questions that was asked was that we go back and model our utilities funds. And if there's a bonding question, which really only comes in the sewer discussion, really, or the transportation. The question was, is go back and look at user fees for that to determine how much capacity we have within our current rate structures to do those bonds. So we'll look at that and bring that back as part of that conversation. But again, since we don't really have transportation ongoing revenues outside of B&C road funds, it's not like we can really model extra. We don't have a road fee, utility fee for roads like some of the cities. There's 13 cities that have implemented that utility fee for roads, and the talk is that the legislature is going to strike that down this session and make it go away. So we were waiting to see how the court battles landed before we even had that conversation. And it looks like that will likely not be an issue that we're going to need to really discuss.
I don't want to put together a toll road.
Foothills of toll.
So, Mayor and Council.
Hey, in a city
there's any
emergency, we'd
specific
make a lot of
questions
money.
You have, that completes the presentation that we had for
I
today.
do have just one quick question. So in kind of the discussions of not wanting to bond for additional capacity for developers to continue to build with own city funds. My question is, like, for some of the other residents that are wanting these amenities to come in sooner, does that lengthen out the time that those amenities can come in by not building out that capacity?
Potentially, yeah.
Okay.
So in the case of the Fox Hollow Performance or Encore Park, if there's no sewer capacity and they don't get to that 2,000 home that triggers our requirement to build that park, it could delay that for much longer. So, it could have ramifications for that. Now, in that particular case, we're still waiting for the developer to excavate a ton of material off of that site that they had stockpiled. And so, as much as I'd love to say, let's charge forward and build that park as soon as we got funding, we're still waiting for the land to be dedicated to us, but we're not gonna take that land dedication until they get to the rough grade that we told them they needed to get to. Again, they stockpiled so much material on it, we don't wanna spend $500,000 removing material on something that is supposed to be a benefit for the community. We don't want the benefit to become a liability. And so, obviously, we need to continue to grade that site and remove all that material off of that, so.
What about like the future library or hot springs? Are those impacted as well by not having that capacity built out?
So the Hot Springs Park would need to be an impact fee related discussion in that regard. because it would potentially be a park amenity type of a project. So that could be looked at as far as the parks go. But again, given the restrictions, you need to tell me that that's a higher priority than, say, finishing the purchase of Patriot Park. And what I heard loud and clear tonight was buying the land for Patriot Park is more important than necessarily amenitizing it. So again, it's from a priority standpoint, you've helped give us great policy direction tonight to help us know how we should be looking to go forward. Another project that we haven't really discussed was a cemetery, and how do we fund a cemetery? Again, as we get a little bit more information on kind of the conversation we had last council meeting regarding the ACUP funds and what that parcel might look like, that is going to be factored into our future conversations about, road access to it, water access to it, those types of things. So again, we'll start factoring those in when we've got a little bit more information, but until that ink is dry, we didn't want to spend a whole lot of time planning on that cemetery parcel.
So the main thing though, like I hear a lot of times from residents that, hey, how come we're not getting these amenities sooner, but also stop development? Is it fairly tied to development as far as when we have more development come in, these projects come in sooner?
They go hand in hand, and it's really kind of a tricky thing because, for example, Costco came very early in its development cycle, anticipating that future growth to hit their perfect numbers. They came while we were still green. Some of these types of projects like, and we talked about this more last year, but say a recreation center, and I use that for example tonight, a recreation center, if we wanted to bond for it and raise taxes to do that, we certainly could do that. But it really probably, based on what I've heard from the council, it's going to have to be a grassroots movement that's going to have to come forward and say, let's raise taxes, let's do a general obligation bond, and it's going to have to be really the residents that are driving that. We as a council or we as staff are limited in us pushing those types of things because it really needs to be, kind of driven by that grassroots type group. So again, a lot of these amenities and a lot of these things that we've discussed, I think are still very much on the plans. It just really becomes that question of when is the appropriate time to fund it. And as a community, if we wanted to raise revenues to do that, I'm happy to do that. I'm not necessarily hearing a majority in the community saying, let's charge forward and build some of these things right now.
My thought, Councilman, is if development slows down, absolutely library, city hall, other amenities will be delayed because partially we fund a lot of this stuff, not with property tax, but sales tax revenue, so slower development. And again, I'm not saying we need to increase development, but slower development means less businesses, less sales tax, et cetera. And so in my mind, there is a spiraling effect.
Yeah, so that's where I'm kind of looking at, is like, where is that kind of fine line of where we do fund some of those projects that frees up capacity and allows development to come in, that then increases our ability to do these projects, but not at the rate where, like Mayor's mentioning, that totally clogs up the infrastructure down south.
And some of those things you're talking about, like a lift station 10, that's a $3 million project. If we bond to fund that, that brings in a lot more residential. That doesn't bring us any sales tax. Now, sales tax will come because there's more residential, but, it's kind of a.
Not $3 million worth.
Right. That's kind of a, not an afterthought. It's a result of more residential, but not.
But for like the ones up north where we have commercial, we can't really pick and choose on if those EAUs are being used by residential or commercial. And so we could have a lot of residential come in that area when we're wanting commercial to come in, but we can't pick and choose.
So this comes down to.
Well, we can a little bit by the zone, right? We don't have to change the zone for someone.
Yeah. This comes down to a big theoretical question about how do cities take the impact fees that they're collecting and use that to point at projects that are consistent with how the city wants to grow. So for example, and I don't, without, let's call it an annexation, a future annexation area. Let's say a future annexation area wanted to come to the city. That's great, but they're going to be asking for, probably public improvement districts and other things so that they can take and get the money to try and build the infrastructure for their projects. That's great. We've done special improvement districts before. We've let developers basically leverage their land so that they could afford the capital that then lets them move their engine forward. I think that's a very appropriate funding mechanism as a community if they're bonding and using their own land as the leverage to build their infrastructure. If it's just an impact fee related question, you as a council, the projects that you prioritize and the projects that you budget through your legislative authority is what then dictates what parts of the cities grow. And so, to Councilmember McComber's point, if you guys choose not to bond for, say, a sewer project or something like that, that is within your legislative authority. We have to spend our impact fee money according to the law. Those projects have to be budgeted. And where we start to get into trouble is if at the end of that cycle, we haven't collected enough projects or funding, the question becomes, have we spent that money down in the 6-year window and have we been moving our projects forward? So it's always about moving the ball forward, and we've gone and shifted. We used to try and put years on when we would build projects. We've stopped trying to be that optimistic, because we got into a couple of projects where the projects weren't built yet. The developer came in and said, I don't have to build that project because you've already been collecting impact fees for it. You said it was going to be built in this year. It's your obligation to build that. So our new impact fees do not have those types of tight deadlines, because again, development is changing so quickly here in the city. We need to be able to adapt to what projects make sense, and making sure that the funding is there and we're using that money to build the infrastructure where you want to encourage growth.
And at the end of the 6-year window, if we haven't spent that, we have to give it back to them, right?
So it really becomes almost a 10-year window in some regards, because you're not collecting the last dollars for that project until the last part of that 10-year window, if you meet all your growth expectations, right? So depending on how fast it grows, if you exceed your growth projections, you're going to collect the money a little bit faster, and in that case, you may have to build the infrastructure sooner. But again, it's always, the money has to be spent or encumbered within that 6-year window. We don't ever want to let impact fees mold.
Right, and I think it's important also, these impact fees are charged to improve the system. It's not, it's not like we can spend this money on something else. It's designed to improve the system, and so, we're not using those impact fees to improve the system, or we're choosing not to improve the system, then we need to adjust our impact fees accordingly.
And ultimately, if we don't spend it, we've got to give it back. And that's just the way the law is written.
Just another clarification for Councilmember Porter is the impact fee law specifies that you cannot raise the level of service. You can only continue the existing level of service. So it's not really there. The purpose of impact fees isn't to improve the system, it's to expand the system to accommodate future growth while maintaining the current level of service.
Okay,
so just
my definition of improve and your definition of expand are very similar.
Well, and a lot of times the expansion, the indirect result, like we're talking about sales tax earlier.
Level of service,
Yeah.
as much as it has to be spent on building sewer.
Right.
Or building water.
Or parks.
So again, we're going to try and come back to you with more refinement. This is probably something we'll look at again at the retreat. We'll hopefully come back with some of the funding questions. Right now, the sewer becomes a bit of an issue that we need to resolve the funding mechanisms around that. We'll spend more time looking at the funding mechanisms for Foothill Boulevard. We'll look at the funding mechanisms of how do we fund Patriot Park. Really, outside of that, it sounds like you're okay with us letting the ball roll on some of these other projects and kind of see what the fees that we collect in the next couple of years are. Again, to some of these points, like in the Parks Impact Fee, when we built Patriot Park, we bonded for that with a sales tax bond. And so technically we can use those impact fees to pay back that bond over time. And, obviously we want to use those funds. So in public safety, for example, they owe the general fund money because you cash funded public safety with the public safety, police department. We cash funded that using general fund monies. So we can pay ourselves back those funds over time as we collect public safety impact fees. So we're in a deficit position in a couple of those funds. And so hopefully as those monies get repaid through responsible growth and the paying of those impact fees, we'll then free up some money that hopefully we could use, to buy the Patriot Park that then ultimately gets reimbursed through development. And so that 5-year capital bank that we've built up in the productive times, as we repay ourselves, we can take that money and use that to leverage some of these other projects. So we'll spend some time looking at that as well as we charge forward.
Okay. Perfect. No need for closed session?
No, blessedly no.
Meeting's adjourned. Really?
Council, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Martin.